I was a junior in college, and I was taking music history. And my professor, Miss Mogg, was Swiss in nationality, and she was a voice teacher, and she loved opera. And so she decided that she should take all of us, her entire class, into Chicago to see an opera. And she knew that it was the first opera that any of us had ever seen, and so she thought she was going to pick something very carefully to make sure that it was a wonderful first opera experience for us. And to do so, she decided that we were going to see Richard Wagner's Tristan and Isolde. Now, for those of you who don't know much about Richard Wagner and Tristan and Isolde, he has a particular style of writing for opera singing, and when his characters are on the stage, they sing and they sing and they sing and they sing, and then they move one step. And then they sing and they sing and they sing and they sing and they move another step. In other words, it's a very slow-paced opera. Not much happens except a lot of singing, and this particular opera was 4 hours long. In addition, Wagner has a way of writing in music such that he doesn't resolve the music. Now I'm going to see if I can't show you what I mean on the piano. My piano skills are not great, but I'll see what I can do to help you understand what I mean by this. When you hear a progression of music, you like it to sort of finish at one point. So you might hear something like this. Right? It finishes. Feels good. It's all done. In Wagner's music, he never gets to the final chord. So you hear, and then instead of it finishing, you're back here, and you might hear something like this. You think it's about to end, and he goes back to this. And you think, oh, well, maybe now we're going to end, and you're back here again. And eventually, 4 hours later, you end up with a final chord. But he never finishes it until the very, very end of the piece. So I remember being in this opera, somewhere about 2.5 hours into it, thinking to myself what a privilege it was that I was there. I was with my friends up in the musician seats in the last balcony in the last row, and I was, enjoying this with my friends who were equally glazed over, and thinking to myself, is this a good experience or a bad experience? Is this going to have a good ending for me or a bad ending for me? There's a lot of life like that. We find ourselves in these experiences, in these days, weeks, and months that seem to kind of go on unending, and we wonder, are we ever going to resolve? Are we ever going to find the end of this thing? And is this going to be a tragedy or a comedy? Is it going to be a good thing or a bad? Is it going to have a good ending or a sad ending? And I would suggest to you today that perhaps it has more to do with us than it does with the circumstances around us. It's a story day in our church today. I have 4 stories for you. The first of those is a story about a woman named Hannah. And if you want to go home and read Hannah's story, you can look in the first 2 chapters of the book of 1 Samuel, where you'll find Hannah's story. Hannah was one of 2 wives married to a man by the name of Elkanah. And unlike Hannah's sister wife, I understand that's the new term, Hannah's sister wife who had lots of children, Hannah had none. Hannah was barren. And back in Old Testament Bible days, it was not a viable option to be a wife with no children. And so she was considered a disgrace to her husband, a shame to her community. So when Hannah and her family went to the great temple in Shiloh to pray, Hannah went into the sanctuary and she wept her prayers to God, asking for a child. She made such a spectacle of herself that the old priest, Eli, thought she was drunk. And he came over and accused her of being intoxicated. And she said, no, 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 you don't understand, and explained her situation. And Eli was compassionate towards her, and he blessed her, and he added his prayer to hers. And Hannah went home, and she conceived, and she bore a child. She bore a son. And you know what she did with that son? When that little boy was weaned, when he was just a little boy, she took him back to the temple and gave him back to God. Let's take a look at Hannah's story. After he was weaned, this is the child, she took the boy with her, young as he was, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. When the bull had been sacrificed, they brought the boy to Eli, and she said to him, "Pardon me, my Lord. As sure as you live, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord." And he worshiped the Lord there. Was Hannah's story a happy story or a sad story? Was it a good ending or a bad ending? We might make the case either way. I mean, we could look at Hannah's life and say, my gosh, the poor woman had no children. She was tormented by this other wife. She finally prayed for a child, and then she felt like she had to give it back to God. It seems a tragedy. But Hannah believed her life was blessed. She understood that God had given her a gift. God had answered her prayers, and so she wanted to give back to God in gratefulness, and she gave God the most precious thing that she had, her only son. She wanted to express her gratefulness in thanksgiving, and so she offered this gift. The second story that we come to today actually takes place in a moment in Jesus' life. He was leaving the city of Jericho and on his way to Jerusalem, where he would go up to die. And as he was leaving Jericho, he was interrupted by a man sitting by the side of the road who was blind and asking for assistance. Let's read Bartimaeus' story. They came to Jericho as Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city. A blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. So Bartimaeus called to Jesus, and Jesus responded. He asked Jesus if he could have his sight, and Jesus healed him. Was it a happy story or a sad story? I suppose it depends on how you look at it. Perhaps Bartimaeus could have been angry. He was blind. He had been forced for who knows how long to sit at the city gates and beg for his bread, unable to care well for his family. He could have been bitter and unhappy. Why did God do this thing to him? Why did it go on so long? Jesus could have been seen as a day late and a dollar short. That's not the way he saw it. Bartimaeus understood that his life had been blessed, that he'd asked God for help and God had answered him. And so when Jesus said to him, "You can go your way, go on home, celebrate with your family," instead he looks for a way to express his gratefulness. And Mark tells us he got on the way with Jesus. He got on the path with him and followed him. Hannah gave her only son. Bartimaeus gave himself. The third story is a story that you know. There were these pilgrims that were not happy with the way that they were able to worship in England, and so they decided to go to a new land. They started in Holland, but Holland was not what they had hoped it would be. So they hopped on this ship, this little ship, and they crossed the Atlantic Ocean in this tumultuous journey. And they arrived too far north from where they thought they were supposed to end up in November, when it was too late to plant crops, and when it was so cold that all they could get up was a single structure for all of them. And they went through this winter, and there was not enough food. They starved, and there was sickness in the house that spread through the house. Half of them died in that first winter. Listen for a moment as Charlie Brown describes what happened in that first Thanksgiving in Charles Schulz's Thanksgiving tribute, The Mayflower Voyagers.
I finished the wash yet. By the end of February, 2.5 months after landing at Plymouth, no Indians have been seen. But the combination of a terrible winter and lack of nutritious food and necessary medical supplies has been devastating. Half of the original 102 passengers have died. Only 20 adults and 30 children have survived. As the winter continues through the first days of March, nothing less than a miracle is needed to save the few survivors. The strong faith of the surviving pilgrims is just about all they have left. Even Captain Miles Standish has been heard saying that time may be running out on the survivors.
20 adults and 30 children left after that first winter. Very grim circumstances. Only a miracle would save them. And a miracle happened in the form of 2 gracious men, 2 Native Americans, who befriended them in the spring, who taught them how to raise food in this new land, who introduced them to Chief Massasoit so that a treaty could be developed, and a treaty was signed between the Pilgrims and the Native Americans of that land that would last for 50 years, a treaty of mutual friendship and assistance. Was it a good story? A bad story? Good times, bad times. I'm sure there were pilgrims who looked back over that past winter at the starvation, at the sickness, at at all of the death of loved ones, and said, this is a travesty, this is a terrible place we have come to, and God has cursed us. And there were those, many, who looked at it and were grateful for the new friends that they had, grateful for the bountiful harvest, grateful for the peace when they expected to have to fight. And they said, God has blessed us. And they threw a feast in celebration They threw a feast as an act of hospitality, as a way of giving thanks to God, thanks-living their faith by sharing with others. Listen as Charlie Brown describes that first feast.
In September and October, the most bountiful harvest the Pilgrim farmers had ever seen. Chief Massasoit brings 90 of his Indian tribe to join the 50 pilgrims for a feast of Thanksgiving.
May we first have a moment of silence for our beloved souls who passed on during our first months on these shores. And now, whosoever wishes to give thanks, please speak out.
We thank the Lord for our bountiful harvest.
We give thanks for our new homes and our good health. Thank you for giving us Samoset and Squanto, and the great Chief Massasoit.
And we thank you, Chief, for our treaty of friendship, and we wish you many years of good health.
Linus, we have so much to be thankful for.
And now it's time for the celebration to begin.
They did have much to be thankful for. All of them. Hannah, Bartimaeus, the pilgrims. And they chose to express their thanks in thanks-living. But I promised you 4 stories, right? The 4th story is yours. I have a story. You have a story. And we each have a story that we know and we live day to day. And sometimes we get to the end of that day and we come home and we say to ourselves and we say to our loved ones, you know, I'm just done. I've had it. I'm toast. I'm up to here with what's been going on, and it's life is just hard. But that's half the story. And I would suggest it's less than half the story. Most of the time, we are more blessed than we remember. Think for a moment about your life. Most of us have a warm, safe place to sleep at night. Most of us have enough to eat. In fact, most of us have more than enough to eat, and we regularly do eat more than we should. Most of us have clothes on our back. I don't see anybody naked here today, and I'm really glad about that. Those 3 things are more than a whole lot of people have across the world. And we have toys and tools and gadgets. We have bicycles and cars for transportation, and we enjoy computers and televisions and opportunities to travel and vacations, and those are just the things that money can buy. We have people to love who love us, who make life lovely. We have hopes and dreams and opportunities and ambitions that give us something to look forward to. We have a good nation. I know we like to grumble about things and complain and wish things were better in this spot and that, but honestly, I don't think there's any place else I'd like to live. We have a good church home, people that encourage us and support us in the faith, and we have a God who wants to be with us, who wants us for himself, who will help us and love us. We are more blessed than we remember day to day. So your story, will you remember to give thanks today? Will you remember to give thanks tomorrow and on Thanksgiving? Could we possibly remember to be thankful every day the rest of 2012? And might we find some way to express that gratitude, to live out our thanks in thanks-living? It's your story. It's my story. We write the ending. Let's pray.